welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay, in for your host, Ladia Keduluale. The headlines. European Parliament declares Russia a state sponsor of terrorism, following strikes on Kyiv which hit energy infrastructure and a hospital. Death toll rises to at least 7 after attacks across Kyiv region. EU Parliament President Roberta Metsola says a pro-Kremlin group has claimed responsibility for denial of service attack on European Parliament website. The European Parliament designated Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, arguing that Moscow's military strikes on civilian targets such as energy infrastructure, hospitals, schools, and shelters violates international law. European lawmakers voted in favor of a resolution calling Russia a state sponsor of terrorism. The move is largely symbolic, as the European Union does not have a legal framework in place to back it up. At the same time, the bloc has already imposed unprecedented sanctions on Russia over its invasion of Ukraine. Moscow reacted angrily to the European Parliament decision.
Lie that we have been hearing constantly from the Russian side, that the Russian military is conducting an operation targeting military objects only. In reality, the more the Russian army is being pushed back and defeated on the battlefield, the more it is targeting civilian objects with an attempt to frighten the Ukrainian society and weaken its resolve.
It is time to recognize the Russian Federation for what it is: a pariah, a menace, a rogue state, and a state sponsor of terrorism. And that recognition must come with consequences. Thank you.
It is clear that a major nuclear power, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, with all its military and administrative power, is committing acts of terror, killing civilians, destroying infrastructure, using systemic violence and intimidation.
Meanwhile, a pro-Kremlin group has claimed responsibility for a denial of service attack on the European Parliament website after its lawmakers designated Russia a state sponsor of terrorism. The president of the institution, Roberta Metsola, wrote on social media, "The European Parliament is under a sophisticated cyber attack. A pro-Kremlin group has claimed responsibility." She adds that a team of its experts are pushing back against it to protect the system. The head of Kyiv Region Military Administration, Alexei Kuleba, says 4 people have died in the region of Kyiv following Russian strikes across Ukraine. Mayor of Kyiv, Vitaly Klitschko, on the other hand, says 3 people were also killed. This brings the number of death toll to at least 7 and 36 others wounded following a fresh wave of Russian attacks. Bodies lay in the streets next to the mangled wreckage of a car in Kyiv as darkness fell over the snow-covered street and fire crews put out blazes in nearby buildings. Russia's attacks also damaged critical infrastructure as Moscow pursued its campaign to plunge Ukrainian cities into darkness and cold at the beginning of winter. However, there are no immediate comments from Russia, which denies targeting civilians. In the meantime, Russian missiles hit a Kyiv suburb, killing at least 5 people and wounding a dozen others. Flames still licked the top floor of the 5-story building in the location more than an hour after it was hit. Local resident Anna Voloke says she was very scared and came running from work, adding that her husband was inside the building hit by the missile and set on fire. She says her husband escaped without major injuries. The Kyiv Regional Administration says the entire Kyiv region, meaning millions of people, were completely without electricity and that the water supply was also badly disrupted. Much of Ukraine suffered similar problems. In the aftermath of the Russian missile strikes on the Ukrainian capital, which caused blackouts, knocking out electricity in the Kyiv region and elsewhere across the city, emergency crews rushed patients into a Kyiv hospital on Wednesday after the strikes, though the power to the hospital was also cut, forcing staff to use generators and stored water. Lack of power forced the shutdown of nuclear reactors in Ukraine's south and west, all in government-held territory. State-run nuclear energy firm has declared. Ukraine's largest nuclear complex at Zaporizhzhia, near the front lines in the south, is Russian-controlled and was previously switched off because of shelling that both sides blame on each other.
Since October, Russia has openly acknowledged.
A woman on a stretcher was seen being wheeled into the Kyiv Regional Hospital for admittance on Wednesday after Russia unleashed a missile barrage across Ukraine, including the capital. Explosions reverberated throughout Kyiv on Wednesday afternoon as Russian missiles bore down on Ukrainian air defense rockets were fired in efforts to pick them off. All of the capital region, where over 3 million people live, was deprived of power and running water, according to the governor of Kyiv, as were many other regions where emergency blackouts were necessary to help conserve energy and carry out repairs. Now, a reaction from the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. His appeal to the United Nations Security Council to take action to stop Russian airstrikes targeting vital infrastructure that have once again plunged Ukrainian cities into darkness and cold as winter sets in. Zelensky calls for Russia to be denied a vote on any decision concerning its actions. U.S. Ambassador to the UN Linda Thomas-Greenfield says Putin was clearly weaponizing winter to inflict immense suffering on the Ukrainian people. Zelensky also urged the group to support the Ukrainian peace formula following a wave of Russian missile strikes that the president dubbed the Russian formula of terror.
We are awaiting a very firm reaction of the world to today's Russian terror, response of our partners, response of our friends, not just observers, but a reaction from all those who really recognize the UN Charter. We're doing everything possible. Ukraine represented a peace formula. The world heard it, 10 items in order to empower the Charter of UN and violated by Russian guarantee security for Ukraine, Europe, and all the peoples of this planet suffering from the consequences of the Russian aggression. So today is just one day, but we have received 70 missiles. That's the Russian formula of terror. This is all against our energy infrastructure. There is a hit also with the residential house damage. Hospitals, schools, transports, residential districts all suffer. The Russian terror led to a complete blackout, not just in Ukraine, but also in neighboring Moldova. But we cannot be hostage to one international terrorist. Russia is doing everything to make an energy generator a more powerful tool than the UN Charter. But we can bring the real sense back to all the things. And first of all, the UN Charter. We need your decisions.
He is clearly weaponizing winter to inflict immense suffering on the Ukrainian people. He has decided that if he can't seize Ukraine by force, he will try to freeze the country into submission. If he gets his way, millions of Ukrainians will be left without power, water, and heat during these cold winter months.
We have stressed more than once that we are not against his participation. However, this participation should be in person. This is required by the rules which have guided the Security Council for 75 years now, especially as Mr. Zelensky isn't even participating in the meeting. What we're hearing from Mr. Zelensky and his supporters is not at all a readiness to achieve peace, but rather the language of reckless threats and ultimatums. The damage to residential housing and victims among the peaceful population is indeed caused by the Ukrainian air defense systems. which are not located at the outskirts of the cities, but in the very center. As a result, debris from missiles, those that hit those places which Russia never targeted. So, for example, today, Ukrainian users posted photos on the internet of missiles that hit residential homes in Kyiv. Turns out that these missiles were American air defense missiles which were supplied to Kyiv.
The spillover effects of the war against Ukraine are felt increasingly in the neighboring countries, including the Republic of Moldova. The Russian aggression against Ukraine has by far deeper implications on the Republic of Moldova's security and stability. The continued attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have left Moldova again in the darkness following a similar incident on November 15. More than 50% of the country was left without electricity. There have been massive blackouts across the country. Water supply was also affected in the pumps were taken out of the order.
Now, we're going to be speaking with Mr. Henrik Larsson, a senior researcher, PhD, Center for Security Studies, who happens to be in Geneva at the moment. A very good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
Now, we know a ground offensive is bad enough, but when you're hitting from the air, and remember the Luftwaffe, the air offensive back in the days of the Second World War, do you think that this is the new tact that the Russians want to stay with to go their own route and win this war the way they'd like to win it?
Yeah, because they have no alternative, because they're not winning on the battlefield. So now they take the fight onto the civilian targets, infrastructure, hospitals even, which is appalling, of course. But most of all, electricity. And unfortunately for Ukraine, the winter has started early. It's already quite cold in Kyiv and other states in Ukraine. So, but I don't believe Russia will succeed. I think the resilience of the Ukrainian people is quite strong.
If the Ukrainians can take mastery of the air and have delivery of the promises that their allies have promised them as far as air defense systems, that will put paid to what the Russians are trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. If I would be a major Western leader, I would definitely beef up the support in terms of air defense. And it's not like tanks or any other equipment, like long-range artillery that the Western countries have been unwilling to give to Ukraine or Escalating. Air missile defense is purely defense, so it cannot cause any concern for escalation against Russia.
What is your view concerning declaring Russia a state sponsor of terrorism? What does that do for the cause? Well, obviously, they're going to be on the wrong side of history at the end of the day, which is happening now already. But is this just more rhetoric to fan the flame?
Yeah, I mean, it's pure symbolism already, because the European Parliament has limited power. It can approve the EU budget, but the overall, in terms of military support, at least, it is limited what the EU as such provides to Ukraine. Of course, then you have the macro financial. I mean, it helps to strengthen the Ukrainian force in Brussels, because there are still member states of the European Union that question the wisdom in providing finances and weapons to Ukraine. I'm talking especially about Hungary here.
You're based in Switzerland, Mr. Larsson, but you're in Geneva at the moment. The Swiss have a very good history of neutrality in many things. What's the position of the Swiss government concerning the war in Ukraine?
So it's twofold. The first part of it is that Switzerland does not condone obvious breaches of international law. And when one country aggresses another country without any reason, which has happened in the case of Russia against Ukraine, it goes against the Swiss DNA, and that is why they have joined the economic bank. So as you know, Switzerland is like a strong tradition of military neutrality. That means Switzerland would never agree to provide Ukraine with weapons, but then it had then agreed to join the economic sanctions along with the European Union. Of course, has been partly pressured by the EU as well. If it wants the existing agreement with the EU in place, it sort of has to agree to this thing. So it's twofold.
With the onset of winter, Mr. Larsen, it has been the worst case scenario for those who wanted a quick end to this war. But if Russia thought it was going to just sashay into Ukraine and there'll be a walk in the park and they'll pick and choose what territories they want and sail off into the sunset, now they have another thing coming. How do you think this war, how long do you think this war will last, given the fact that both sides are not doing much to return to the negotiating table?
I think it would last well into next year and maybe longer. I mean, Ukraine has momentum on the battlefield. Russia, a few weeks ago, left the city of Kherson with a major victory for Ukraine. So at this moment, Ukraine has no incentive to sit down and negotiate. I mean, the fighting willingness of Ukraine is strong. If you look at the opinion polls, it's strong, like around 90% are in favor of taking back territories that belong to Ukraine. That includes Crimea. So I don't see that peace talks coming up. I think the Russians are really interested in peace, of course. They are in a weak position and they are losing territories they have formally annexed. It doesn't look good for Putin and his the prospect of him staying in power is a humiliation. So of course Russia is interested in peace.
As a researcher, can you give us refresh our memories again on why Russia is doing this? Give us some historical perspective on what's happening, on why they thought, or why they say that Crimea is theirs and these other territories as well, and the Russian people, as well, the Russian sympathizers in Ukraine should be given the kind of independence that they deserve according to Russia.
So it goes back to the end of the Cold War. Different interpretation of how the Cold War ended. If you sit in Washington and in Brussels, you think that the West won the Cold War, and therefore the order that includes was a Western order taking values, and that meant the expansion of the EU and the expansion of NATO were legitimate actions. If you were in Moscow at the time, you had the impression that the Cold War was ended by mutual agreement between the Soviet Union and the United States and their allies. So from Russia's perspective, it is a violation of the end of the Cold War that they did out of their own grace and politics. So they believe the idea of Ukraine aligned with the West is intolerable because it's a breach of the alleged promises that were given to them. So there's a deeper historical discussion. I mean, these pledges, they were never given firmly in a way that you would normally do in international relations. If you hold that against the numerous Russian breaches of all kinds of international treaties that have been given to Ukraine and to the West, it doesn't look very good.
And we hope it gets better and doesn't get worse. Thank you so much, Mr. Henrik Larsen, Senior Researcher, PhD, Center for Security Studies in Switzerland, but in Geneva at the moment. Thank you for coming on our special coverage of Russian invasion. After the break, Lviv Mayor Andriy Sadovy says almost all power restored to the city. Please stay with us. Welcome back. The Ukrainian military targeted residential areas of Donetsk with heavy artillery late on Wednesday, with the shells reportedly striking multiple districts of the city. At least 10 155mm shells were fired from the Ukrainian-controlled outskirts of the city around 11:30 p.m. Local observers confirmed hearing 3 separate blasts in different areas of Donetsk. Several houses and vehicles were damaged during the late evening attack. So far, no information of potential casualties among civilians has emerged. The attack followed a series of smaller artillery strikes earlier in the day and came shortly before the extraordinary session of the UN Security Council, during which Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky accused Russia of being a terrorist state for targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure. The Biden administration has condemned Russian strikes on power-generating infrastructure across Ukraine. National Security Council spokesperson Adrian Watson said in a statement that Russia is increasingly turning to horrific attacks against the Ukrainian people, with punishing strikes, damaging energy grid infrastructure, and deliberately doing so as winter approaches. Watson said that the strikes do not appear aimed at any military purpose, but instead further the goal of the Putin regime to increase the suffering and death of Ukrainians. The U.S. also warned that the actions show Russia is willing to increase the risk of a nuclear safety incident that could not only further harm Ukraine, but affect the entire region as well. Watson's statement touted an additional $400 million security assistance package for Ukraine. Meanwhile, the negotiations between Kyiv and Moscow on the establishment of a safety zone around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant continues, but in the meantime, the director of the UN nuclear watchdog is warning about potential consequences. International Atomic Energy Agency Director General Rafael Grossi says, "We cannot continue counting on good luck to avoid a nuclear accident." Grossi further said negotiations are moving forward, but this is an active combat zone. Therefore, getting to agreed parameters for this is not such an easy thing to do. The IAEA director said he met with the Russian delegation in Turkey earlier on Wednesday and spoke with Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba on Tuesday. Now, we'll be speaking to the former ambassador to Switzerland and Principality of Liechtenstein, permanent rep of Nigeria to the UN and other international organizations at Geneva, who will be joining us virtually from Abuja, if we have that connection. You're welcome to the program this morning.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Good morning.
Loud and clear. Do you think that the Russians are hearing what the world is saying concerning this, what they call the special military operation? And what are your thoughts initially concerning the latest attacks against Kyiv and the use of missiles?
You know, historically, one should say that Russia has always weaponized the winter, actually used the winter as an instrument of winning its wars. For those who believe that these special operations in Ukraine was a miscalculation, it is getting clearer that Russia is looking for a way of saving its face and ending this war. This blitzkrieg of missiles, using missiles to virtually destroy all civilian infrastructure in a time of winter, is posing a problem for the global community to consider. Is this terrorism, as the Ukrainian president is saying, or is this simply war crimes, as the United Nations may be considering? So there is a serious challenge here for the world to consider. And two obstacles stand on the way of the United Nations. One is legal. Russia is a veto-wielding member of the UN Security Council. So to start applying the United Nations instruments against Russia is not something that is very likely to happen anytime soon, because Russia will veto it. The other concerning issue, or also restraining United Nations involvement in any way bigger than it is realism, political realism. Russia is probably the second, if not the first, biggest nuclear power in the world. So how do you even enforce anything. A week ago or so, a stray missile hit a region close to Lviv, that's in Poland. And the European Union, the United States, and the UN had to rationalize it as probably a stress error missile from the Ukrainian Defense Forces themselves. That tells us that this war is becoming more and more dangerous, as was feared initially, because Russia is a nuclear power. Ukraine is being decimated gradually. Because if the number of missiles we hear are landing, destroying civilian infrastructure, to the extent that the World Health Organization Director General, who is usually not involved in these matters of political decisions, is condemning some actions involving the destruction of civilian hospitals, including maternity wards and stuff like that. The chances of hundreds, even thousands of people perishing in Ukraine during this winter, when temperatures should be ranging from -4 degrees to probably sometime -10 degrees through the centigrade during this winter. The calculation of number of deaths that is possible, probable, is simply not what we can contemplate in this time and age. So that is the situation. What is to be done?
Dr. Humphrey, you know what they say, prevention is better than cure. For those, and you mentioned the power of the United Nations and the veto power that Russia has on the Security Council. But before this got this bad, when they were massing their troops on the border with Ukraine, for those who will say that, for want of a better term, the United Nations doesn't have the grapefruits to stop Russia or to dissuade Russia from what it's doing, what do you think could have been done to prevent this in the first place by way of diplomacy that wasn't done? Or was everything done, in your view, that could have been done to stop Russia from actually engaging ground forces?
Actually, I have always personally maintained that there is no easy way to understand Mr. Putin's thinking and his war aims. At least at the beginning of this thing, he wasn't talking about annexation of any parts of Ukraine. At best, he was talking of their autonomy, their independence, but not to annex them to become part of Russia. So how could anyone have satisfied Russia at the beginning of this massing of troops and stuff like that? It was always a very difficult question for the United Nations to address. Again, because Russia is not just an ordinary power. So there is some element of hope that probably they will still come to the negotiating table to resolve this. First of all, as a way out for Russia itself, and the most important of all, as a way to save Ukraine from extinction as a functional state. Part of that optimism is this prisoner exchange that is taking place right now. That's something to say. This is hopeful. And of course, renewal of the grain export agreement to the Black Sea. These indicate that Russia also should be interested or is interested in reaching certain compromises. But would those compromises include Ukraine giving up the 3 or 4 provinces in its eastern flank, about 1/5 of its territorial space that Russia has declared part of its own country? These are very tough questions. The United Nations couldn't have stopped Russia from pushing in February this year when it wanted to invade because there was no way Ukraine was going to agree to give up part of its territory. I don't see even the weakest countries in the world today. One of the things they consider most sacred, sacrosanct to them, is their territorial integrity, the territorial integrity and respect for their countries. No country wants to give up even an inch of its territory. I don't see any reason we should expect Ukraine to want to do that. So probably something will happen, and then we'll see where it takes Russia and Ukraine to sort this matter out.
Yeah, Dr. Humphrey.
It's difficult.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, it's a very thorny issue, to put it mildly. You preempted my next question as to what concessions Ukraine can make. Can they be seen to want to make any concessions of whatever kind? But are there any gray areas that or loopholes you think that can be exploited by the mediatory countries to bring an end to this war?
I think the only, in my own thinking, the only really feasible concessions the Ukrainians could make would be the original talk about joining NATO or not joining NATO. Personally, I'm not persuaded that that was reason enough for Russia to invade Ukraine. But if it was, that is something that Ukraine should be quite prepared to give up the ambition of joining NATO so as not to expose Russia's immediate flanks to NATO forces. That is something that is quite considerable. The other thing that could happen, possibly, is for the entire world to actually come together on this matter. By that, we mean countries that are not identifying fully with Ukraine at this time. Countries like China, countries like India, Iran, Brazil, all the countries that have not put their voice in asking Russia and Mr. Putin to end this war. Let them end the war first, at least have a prolonged truce, and then begin to talk about the status of those provinces in the eastern region of Ukraine that Russia has annexed. Again, that is about the only thing that we could think of at the moment.
Thank you,
Dr. Fear.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Orijako Humphrey, former ambassador to Switzerland and the Principality of Liechtenstein, permanent rep of Nigeria to the UN and other international organizations at Geneva, for speaking to us with your knowledge of these issues on our special coverage.
Thank you so much. You're welcome.
Now, as we have been reporting, Russian strikes across Ukraine caused blackouts and power cuts. But the mayor of Lviv, Andrei Sadovil, says power has been restored to almost 90% of the Ukrainian city, following another barrage of Russian strikes which knocked out electricity throughout much of the country. In a Telegram statement, he says that scheduled blackouts, which have become regular during the invasion, will continue due to the country's war-damaged energy infrastructure. Water and heating have also been restored, and all city services are working. The situation in Odessa is similar, with water and heat restored, according to the deputy head of the office of the president of Ukraine. According to him, electricity in Zaporizhzhia region has also been restored. About 1/3 of the region has electricity, with critical infrastructure facilities being connected to the power supply first. Meanwhile, Europe's largest cities will donate power generators and transformers to Ukraine as part of a joint campaign. It comes as temperatures begin to drop and Russia continues to attack Ukrainian energy infrastructure. The Generators of Hope initiative, which is called, Launched by European Parliament President Roberta Metsola and Dario Nardella, Mayor of Florence and President of Eurocities, a network of more than 200 large European cities, is aimed at providing energy to essential facilities in the country, including hospitals, schools, water supply stations, relief centers, shelters, and phone masts. Metsola believes by launching this direct call to action for cities to get together and help Ukraine, and by donating generators and transformers, they can help ensure that Ukraine cities will be able to manage their day-to-day lives in the best way possible. And now we turn our attention to the business angle of this war in Ukraine. Laddie Williams is here to bring us up to speed and give us the what's going on.
Exactly.
The minutes for the last Fed meeting is out. You were explaining to me that the investors will be looking at the outcome of these meetings to determine what direction, what their best options are.
Right. So at the end of the day, we've seen the war on inflation, globally. Central bankers raising rates, trying to tame, sky-high inflation. We've seen, record high inflation in the US, in the UK, even here, in Nigeria. So it's the same, inflation battle. But battling inflation, the central bankers have, a couple of arsenals in their war chest, against inflation. And one of them is raising rates. And we've seen them raise rates a lot, in 2022. And in the U.S., investors watch the Fed, like a hawk, trying to get a direction, for the next, rate hikes. What's going to happen next? Are they going to raise rates? Because we know there's that inverse relationship between interest rate hikes and equity market. And most of the investors are playing in the equities market, because that's where they make, the most profit. But we've seen equity markets fall a lot, in 2022 with these rate hikes. So at the end of the day, investors want to know, is the Fed going to go higher, with rate hikes, or are they going to pivot at some point or slow down, with the jumbo rate hikes? And this last meeting, the minutes are out, and it's looking like the Fed might actually taper on their rate hikes. It might not be as big, as the 75 basis points we're used to. They might come down to about 50 basis points. So investors are looking at this and saying, you know what, maybe it's time for risk on. It's time to get back, in this equity markets and, try to make back some of the profit they've lost, from the previous highs. So this is a crucial minutes they've seen, and all indications is that the Fed is going to cool down, with the rate hikes in the next meeting. Maybe we might get a 50 basis points hike, at the next meeting. But these things can change at any moment. But investors are excited.
It's pretty volatile?
Yeah, pretty volatile. But investors are excited at this time.
Okay. How excited are they about the U.S. dollar staying under pressure?
Yeah.
During the holiday season?
Yeah, so investors are also excited about that because, with the rate hikes we've seen, this year, that has strengthened the dollar. We saw the DXY get to about 114 points. That's the US dollar against a basket of other trading currencies there. And we saw it get to 114 points. That was a high, for this year. But now, with this dovish comment we're seeing from the Fed, we've seen that the DXY chart plunge, nosedive. This morning is about 105, 105 points this morning. It was trading at 106. For a while, but now it's lost that level, 105. So there's also that, inverse relationship between the US dollar and risk assets. So when the US dollar was going up, we saw equities go down. So now that the US dollar is going down, we might see some action in an equities market, that's in the global equities market. So we're seeing investors already excited, about all of that. And it all boils down to what the Fed is going to do next.
Okay, and how are other markets looking?
Yeah, other markets are looking good. In Europe is looking good too because, investors have weighed, how high or low the Fed might go next, with their rate hike. So we're seeing excitement in markets, right now. And right here in Nigeria, we saw the NGX rose about 2.9%, almost 3% yesterday. It was like the cement champions that took up the market yesterday. And we saw you know, the MPC did raise rates, but not as high as the last one, which was 150 basis points. This time they went 100 basis points. So that might be playing into the action we're seeing in the NGX here, talking about the local bourse. But the markets are not looking bad today at all.
Okay, the oil prices, they fell, extending losses from the previous session. What's the driving sentiment?
Yeah, so oil prices, we're still seeing, you know, volatility in that market. Investors were happy, you know, that prices might actually go up with the Russia, with the G7, they're planning that Russia oil price cap. And they were expecting it would be a really low cap, but it's around $60 to about $70. So they're not seeing it as, you know, that high, and it might not disrupt, you know, supply from Russia. So we're seeing investors already price that in and saying, you know what, this might not, you know, be that hike in price we're actually looking for. And we're seeing, you know, demand issues with China with rising COVID levels. So we're seeing oil actually get farther away from that $100 per barrel mark. And it's good for, you know, us. We need the energy prices to go down. You know, but obviously the investors won't be happy with that.
Black gold oil.
Exactly.
Many thanks, Laddie. More on business after the end of this program.
Exactly.
At the end, at the top of the next hour.
Exactly.
Business Morning. Many thanks. Now, coming up on our special coverage of Russian invasion, a number of stories, including Putin defends Russian-led alliance and the Pentagon dodges Ukraine aid question. Please stay with us. Power units of 3 Ukrainian nuclear power plants were switched off on Wednesday after Russian missile strikes across the country. This was confirmed by Ukraine's state-run nuclear energy firm, and it said in a statement that due to a decrease in frequency in the energy system of Ukraine, emergency protection was activated, and the power plants currently, they have work to project more without generation into the domestic energy systems, according to the officials. In another development, Spain will send at least 130 troops and 8 F-18 fighter jets to Romania next month to strengthen the eastern flank of NATO. That's according to the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez and his Romanian counterpart, Nicolae Cerca. As tension escalated in the area after a stray missile crashed in Poland, NATO allies conducted on Wednesday a military exercise to test air and missile defenses in Romania. Spain, which already had 38 troops deployed in Romania, aims to send the jet fighters along with an air surveillance radar to reinforce the air defense system in the country. Several other allies have also moved weapons to NATO's eastern flank following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. France has deployed its SAM-T air defense system to Romania. German Patriot fire units are deployed to Slovakia. The United States is operating Patriots in Poland, and Spain also sent NASAM systems to Latvia. Russian President Vladimir Putin told the CSTO summit that the work of the Collective Security Treaty Organization is not flawless, but it still contributes to defending the national interests of member states. Along with Russia, the bloc comprises Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. Speaking at the meeting in the Armenian capital, Yerevan, the Russian president said, in his words, "We do not see just achievements, but problems as well." The host nation's Prime Minister, Nikol Pashinyan, criticized the alliance's response to an outbreak of hostilities between Armenia and its regional rival, Azerbaijan, during the summit. Pashinyan says it was disappointing that Yerevan CSTO membership did not prevent Baku from what he called aggressive tactics. The Prime Minister also stated that the bloc's members have also far failed to reach a consensus when it comes to the CSTO's reaction to Azerbaijani actions. Putin maintained on Wednesday that the CSTO's work does not, or rather it does, bring about visible practical results and also helps to defend national interests, sovereignty, and independence of nations. The Russian president highlighted a peacekeeping mission launched by the CSTO in Kazakhstan in January. Now, the U.S. military has declined to give an exact breakdown for billions of dollars in aid to Ukraine requested by the White House last week, saying it would not discuss funding to replenish domestic arms stocks and reports of growing shortages. Asked about President Joe Biden's letter to Congress requesting an additional $37.7 billion in assistance to Kyiv, the Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary Sabrina Singh refused to offer details. During the press conference, she says in her words, "I would not be able to tell you how much of that is going back to replenishment. With every security assistance package that we announce, we assess our own readiness and capabilities and also what needs to be replenished." Pressed on whether she could take the question back to the Pentagon and provide an answer later, saying doubled down, saying, "I am not going to take the question because I'm answering your question." She reiterated, "I just don't have a number or a dollar figure for you right now on what that looks like, and I don't think that's something that we should broadcast from here." Though the White House previously said that $21.7 billion of the requested aid will be devoted to both equipment for Ukraine and the replenishment of Department of Defense stocks, it did not specify how much will go to each. And finally on the program, after a 2-decade hiatus, Russia launched production of the Moskvich car brand at a plant near Moscow, given up by the French car maker Renault, with a new modern Chinese design that barely resembles the Soviet-era classic. While the last Moskvich, called the Muscovite as a nickname, was a basic 3-box salon or pedestrian hatchback car, the Moskvich 3 is a muscular-looking, petrol-powered crossover hatchback with alloy wheels, lead-slit headlights, and a large central touchscreen display. In fact, the car looks identical to the Seoul X4 compact crossover made by China's Jag company, also known as the Jag JS4. Sources told news agencies that Jag's design, engineering and platform were being used, with parts being delivered from China, and the vehicles shown at the launch displayed numerous Jag stickers bearing part codes. However, the plant's project manager says the car will have an anti-lock braking system, one of the features that Russia's Avtovaz has been forced to remove from Laden models because of the Western trade sanctions imposed in response to Moscow's military campaign in Ukraine. And that's today's special coverage of Russian invasion on Channels Television. I'm Olumide Macaulay in for your host, Ladia Kerdulale. Thank you so much for your company. See you next time.